Recently, a parishioner emailed me an article that they had found helpful, an article entitled "The Secrets to True Happiness." And the article reads, "If you can start the day without caffeine, if you can always be cheerful, ignoring aches and pains, if you can resist complaining and boring people with your troubles, if you can eat the same food every day and be grateful for it, if you can understand when a friend is too busy to give you any time, if you can take criticism and blame without resentment, if you can ignore a friend's limited education and never correct him, if you can resist treating a rich friend better than a poor friend, if you can conquer tension without medical help, if you can relax without alcohol, if you can sleep without the aid of drugs, if you can honestly say deep in your heart that you have no prejudice for creed, color, religion, or politics, if you can forgive a loved one who unknowingly takes out their troubles on you and through no fault of your own hurts you, and if you can greet each person afresh each day, carrying absolutely no grudges, well then, you are probably the family dog." And thus the only one in the house who's learned the secret to true happiness. How are we doing this? Doing with this? As good as the dog? Particularly in regards to that last one, letting go of grudges, carrying no anger or bitterness into each new day. How are you doing? A great preacher once said, "We can never truly embrace God's love if anything within us is contrary to love, is clinging to ancient wounds and nursing old grudges." Let's face it, for every one of us from time to time, and in fact for some, just about all the time, a lot of life, a lot of joy and blessing is lost to anger and bitterness. Well, this is what I'd like to talk about this morning, working to overcome those destructive forces, learning to conquer anger. Today we arrive at the penultimate installment in our study of the life of Joseph, the climactic moment towards which we have been building throughout the whole saga. Joseph, having been sold off into slavery by his vindictive brothers 20 years ago, has not only survived, but he has risen to a position of tremendous power in the land of Egypt. There he has been reunited with his brothers who, believing he is long dead, fail to recognize him. Struggling with what to do with these siblings who have so deeply hurt him, Joseph has been kind of working them over, part testing them, part inflicting pain and trouble upon them. All the time, though, he has been wrestling with his feelings, wanting to injure them, but also wanting to be reunited with them, to be family once again. Well, finally, having heard his brother Judah's impassioned plea for mercy, Joseph's emotions get the better of him. And sending everyone else out of the room except his brothers, he begins to weep uncontrollably. He reveals his identity to them. They don't believe it's him, but he assures them, "Trust me, it's me. It's your brother, Joseph." And as we saw last week, just how much the brothers had changed over the years, so now we also see just how much Joseph has changed. Essentially, he says, the past is the past, all is forgiven. Let's move on. The brothers then fall upon each other's shoulders and weeping and embracing. It's one of the great moments in the Bible. This family, all these lives put back together. The downward spiral of brokenness and pain is halted and turned into overwhelming joy and blessing. And how does this all come about? Very simply, because Joseph, despite all the emotions raging within him, chooses to put aside his anger and his bitterness, to let go of a grudge in favor of love. The point? Well, that if you and I want to experience the same overwhelming joy and blessing all the time, we have to learn to do the same. We have to consistently weed out of our lives any hatred and anger and resentment. So how do we go about doing this? A few thoughts from the text. 4 basic rules in overcoming anger and bitterness. Rule number 1, quit stalling. As mentioned, Joseph has been wrestling with his emotions for some time, wanting to be reconciled with his brothers, but also out of pride or anger or confusion or whatever, fighting that off. Well, here he finally refuses all those things. He gives in to the love that is deep within him. He chooses to forgive, and it happens. And this is the first point here. Defeating anger is, first of all, a choice. It's not something that just magically happens. It's a conscious choice that an individual makes. This is the first mistake that a lot of people make. They never make this conscious choice. Either they are so invested in their anger, so busy justifying their right to be angry that they fail to see the wrong of it and what it's doing to them, which we'll come back to shortly. Or even more often what happens is this. A person recognizes their anger and they want to get over it, but they never really make the decision to do so. What they say instead is, I'm trying to get over this. Wrong. Trying implies that you're taking a shot at it, but you're not totally committed. Trust me, you will never get over anger that way. Quit trying and start deciding. Take authority over your life. Say, I refuse delivery. I refuse this bitterness in my heart. Whenever it shows up, I'm kicking it to the curb. Right? Getting over anger is, first of all, a choice. A conscious choice that we make regardless of how we feel, saying, this I choose to do because I must before it is too late. A choice that we unfortunately more often than not delay to our own harm. We resist, we excuse, we procrastinate, and things just get worse, not they fester, becoming even more difficult to heal. Quit stalling. Make the decision. Get right now. You know, I once heard somebody say that most people's favorite meal must be stew. After all, they spend all their time stewing over everything that has hurt them. How much of your diet every day consists of stew? How much are you allowing your annoyances to rule you? Take charge today. One author writes, a man was walking along a trail in East Africa with some friends, and he became aware of a delightful scent that filled the air. He looked up in the trees and around in the bushes in an effort to discover where it was coming from. Then his friends told him to look down at the small blue flower that grew along the path. Each time they crushed tiny blossoms under their feet, more of its sweet perfume was released into the air. And then his friends said, we call that the forgiveness flower. The forgiveness flower does not wait until we ask forgiveness for crushing it. It does not release its fragrance in measured doses or hold us to a reciprocal agreement. It does not ask for an apology. It merely lives up to its name and forgives. Freely, fully, instantly, and richly. Might we do the same? Rule number 1 in overcoming anger, quit stalling. Rule number 2, consider the cost. A few years ago, the following news item appeared in the New York Times. When Marie Lupe Cooley, age 41, of Jacksonville, Florida, saw a help wanted ad in the newspaper for a position that looked suspiciously like her current job and with her boss's phone number listed, she became upset and assumed that she was about to be fired. So, police say, she went late Sunday night to the architectural office where she works, and she erased 7 years' worth of drawings and blueprints estimated to be worth $2.5 million. As for the job, Cooley actually wasn't in danger of losing it. It seems the ad was for Hutchins' wife's company. The firm has reported that Cooley no longer is employed there. Legal proceedings are pending. The lesson? Very simple. That if you let anger take hold of you, it will always take you to a bad place. Some place you better not go. It will hurt and destroy you. This is something of the second point we need to consider here. Having established that the first step in overcoming bitterness is taking charge of our emotions, making a conscious decision to refuse the anger in our hearts. This then leads to the second issue, namely, the incredible difficulty of doing this, right? Simply put, we can all talk as Christians about wanting to get rid of the bad feelings in our heart, wanting to be all loving and forgiving like Jesus. But the plain fact is that it's often extremely hard to do so. Well, if you struggle with making this decision, if you need some extra motivation to do so, the trick is simply to look at what your anger is doing to you. Say in Joseph's case, just think about what his bitterness was keeping him from. His family, his homeland, his beloved father who he hadn't seen in decades. Hold that grudge and he will never have these things again. Let it go and the grudge and all the blessings are his. The grudge is ultimately hurting him most of all. Anger exacts a high price from our lives. As it has been said, anger is an acid that does more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured. Right? We fail for this. We fall for this all the time, you know? Do you know that holding a grudge literally weighs you down? It's true. A study was done at Erasmus University, and the researchers asked study participants to write about a time when they'd experienced a conflict in their lives. And some were instructed to reflect upon a time when they didn't forgive the offender. Others were told to think about a time when they did forgive the person. They were then given a small physical challenge, jumping 5 times as high as they could without bending their knees. The results? Those who had been thinking about a time that they had forgiven jumped highest, just shy of 12 inches on average, while those who had written about holding their grudges jumped only 8 inches on average. In another similar experiment, people who had been set up to think about a time when they'd held a grudge estimated that a hill was steeper than people who were thinking about a time when they forgave someone. The results suggest that the weight of carrying a grudge may be more than just a metaphor. The lead researcher for the study wrote, "A state of bitterness is like carrying a heavy burden, a burden that victims bring with them when they navigate the physical world. Forgiveness can lighten your burden." Second mistake that so many people make, they insist on holding on to bitterness and resentment that does nothing but hold back their own lives, you know? Basically, if you really need a push to really let go of your anger today, just think about what that anger is doing to you personally, how it's eating away at you and at your happiness. Those hours, spent staying up fuming, the high blood pressure, the knot in your stomach, the things you can no longer do, the places you can no longer go, the activities you can no longer enjoy. Have you ever heard the story of a little boy who one day was sitting on a park bench, right? And the boy was in obvious pain. And a man walked by and asked him what was wrong. And the boy answered, "Well, I'm sitting on a bumblebee." "Well, then why don't you get up?" the man asked. And the boy replied, "Because I figure I'm hurting him more than he's hurting me." Ask, what is the cost of my anger, and why on earth am I paying it? It has been said, forgive others, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. Rule number 2 in overcoming anger, consider the cost. Which leads us into rule number 3, dare to care. Consider the following. A childhood accident caused great poet Elizabeth Barrett to lead a life of semi-invalidism before she married Robert Browning in 1846. But there's more to the story. In her youth, Elizabeth had been washed over by her tyrannical father, and when she and Robert were married, their wedding was held in secret because of her parents' disapproval. After the wedding, the Brownings sailed for Italy, where they lived the rest of their lives. But even though her parents had disowned her, Elizabeth never gave up on the relationship. And almost weekly, she wrote them letters, and not once did they reply. Many years later, after her parents' death, she received a large box in the mail, and inside Elizabeth found all of her letters, and not one of them had been opened. The letters are some of the most beautiful in the English literature. Had her parents but read just one of them, their relationship with Elizabeth might have been restored. They might have gotten their daughter back. Instead, they chose to hold a grudge and never open it. And this directs us to our third point here. I believe it's very telling that the text emphasizes just the tremendous outpouring of tears by Joseph here. He just kind of opens up the floodgates. And that's the point, you see. He opens himself. As we discover, he has opened himself to see the love that he has for his brothers. He has opened himself to see the tremendous worth he sees in them, not just the wrong that they have done. He has opened himself to trying to see what has happened from their point of view, to understand their own struggle within it. As he even says to them, do not be upset with yourselves for what you have done to me. He opens his heart to something more than just injury. Specifically, he opens his heart to feel for those who have hurt him. He dares to care. This is the third step in overcoming anger. It's opening our hearts to more than just the wrong that has been done, the injury that we feel. It's opening our hearts to remember the value of that other person to us. It's opening our hearts to try to understand things from their perspective, not just our own, to care for them, not just ourselves. So often we fail to do this, so locked into our own perspective that we can see only ourselves and the wrong of others, you know? Well, the wise person always seeks out the other person's point of view, the good within them, no matter what injuries may have occurred. Think of it this way. A number of years ago, true story, a local news station in the Midwest, was interviewing an 80-year-old woman because after 3 failed marriages, she had just gotten married for the 4th time. The interviewer asked her questions about her life, about what it was like to be married again at 80, and about her husband's occupation, new husband's occupation. And she said, well, he's a funeral director. Well, interesting, the newsman thought. He then asked her if she wouldn't mind telling him a little about her first 3 husbands and what they had done for a living. And the woman went on to explain that she had first married a banker when she was in her 20s. Then she happened to marry a circus ringmaster in her 40s. Then a preacher in her 60s, and now, of course, in her 80s, a funeral director. The interviewer looked at her astonished and asked why she had married 4 men with such diverse careers: a banker, ringmaster, preacher, funeral director. Well, with that, a big smile came upon the woman's face, and she replied, well, I look at it this way. I married 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to make ready, 2 for it up. You see, things might not have worked out the way she wanted, but she wasn't holding any grudges. Right? She saw the gift of every person in her life, even when it went totally wrong. How often does pain and injury persist when healing and joy could occur simply because we won't open our hearts to see something more, to believe in something better, to understand and value and care for the other person? Preacher Mark Mitchell writes, several years ago I was moved by the writings of 3 well-known Christian authors, one of them being Eugene Peterson, the author of The Message. I wrote each author a letter expressing my appreciation for their insights into spiritual formation. I also mentioned in each note that I'd love to spend some time with them if there ever might be an opportunity to do so. Within a few weeks, I received gracious letters back from the other 2 authors, but I waited for my reply from Eugene Peterson. Months passed, and it never arrived. My cynical mind concluded that this man, who had written so eloquently about being an unbusy pastor, was just too busy or too important to write me back. I was hurt. A year later, I was speaking to a small group of people, and I mentioned the 3 letters I'd written and the results, including Peterson's non-response. Little did I know that one of the women in the audience that night happened to be a good friend of Eugene Peterson. She told me that she was scheduled to see him in the near future and that she asked him about the letter. A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived from Eugene Peterson. He explained he'd received my letter a year earlier, but had lost the envelope with my return address. To my surprise, he had kept the letter on the top of his desk for the entire year, praying every day that somehow he would discover where to send his response. A few weeks later, when we met for lunch, we both marveled at God's providence, and he kindly accepted my apology for presuming I knew why he had not written it. Indeed, he was as unbusy as his writings led me to believe. I had been angry at him when he had been nothing but incredibly kind to me. So often we presume to know why people don't meet our expectations and why they hurt us. But so often we just don't know the whole story, and we never even bother to look for it. Rule number 3 in conquering bitterness: dare to care. And then finally, rule number 4: break the cycle. A noted scholar writes, the great leader of the early church in China, Watchman Nee, tells about a Chinese Christian who once owned a rice paddy next to one owned by a communist man. The Christian irrigated his paddy by pumping water out of a canal using one of those leg-operated pumps that make the user appear to be seated on a bicycle. Every day after the Christian had pumped enough water to fill his field, the communist would come out, remove some boards that kept the water in the Christian's field, and let all the water flow down into his own field. That way, his crops were irrigated, but he didn't have to pump. This continued day after day after day. Finally, the Christian prayed, Lord, if this keeps up, I'm going to lose all my rice, maybe even my field. I've got a family to care for. I am so angry. What can I do? In answer to his request, the Lord put a thought in his mind. It wasn't a thought he welcomed, but being a faithful Christian, he obeyed. And so the next morning, he arose much earlier, in the pre-dawn hours of darkness, and started pumping water into the field of his communist neighbor. Afterwards, he replaced the boards and pumped water into his own rice paddy. This continued over the next few days. The Christian would first water his neighbor's field, and then his own. And well, in a few weeks, both fields of rice were doing very well, and the communist, witnessing this, was converted to faith in Christ. The two became close friends and helped each other the rest of their days. When we're angry, when we're annoyed, the ultimate answer is not to get even, to hurt back, to even have to correct the other person, but simply to bless them, to break the cycle of injury. It's our final lesson here. Returning to our text, in the end, notice that in speaking to his brothers, Joseph does not avoid the fact that there is a problem between them, an injury. He states it outright. I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. He confronts the issue that stands between them. And this is crucial. Not only in forgiveness must both face up to and address the real issue, or it can never be resolved, but specifically in regards to anger, the anger must be confronted. And what this means is facing the demand it's making of us and refusing that in favor of what God wants in this situation. It is saying and enacting that the hurt stops here. The final step in combating anger and bitterness: break the cycle of the injury. Refuse what it's trying to get you to do, and instead think of what God wants in the situation and pursue that. Create the relationship and life that bitterness is trying to destroy. Basically, if you're bugged, quit stewing about it and do something good. How might we create life and relationship in the places of anger in our lives this day? Instead of fuming or complaining or lashing out, to instead reach out, to offer a kindness, to talk, to pray for someone, to give to them, to sacrifice for them, to make life as it should be. As Christ our Savior came to break the cycle of injury and pain and sin, how might we do the same in all the relationships in our lives? What is God asking you to do today instead of being angry? One author writes, some years ago, a young Korean, after graduating from the Seoul National University, came to the United States to study at the University of Pennsylvania. On his way to mail a letter one evening, he was stopped by a gang of 11 delinquent teenagers looking for some money. They wanted 65 cents each to get into a dance. The Korean boy had no money, so the teenagers beat him to death for $7.15. The murder shocked Philadelphia. Most citizens felt that the severest punishment would be too good for the culprits. But on the other side of the world, the parents of the Korean boy viewed the tragedy differently. Their letter to Philadelphia authorities stirred hearts everywhere. In it, they said that they were establishing a fund to be used for the religious, educational, vocational, and social guidance of the teenagers who had killed their son. Not avoiding, not excusing, not forgetting, but confronting and breaking the cycle of evil. Might we do the same? We can never truly embrace God's love if anywhere within us is contrary to it, is clinging to ancient wounds and nursing old grudges. This week, when angry thoughts and feelings inevitably start to take hold of you, remember, quit stalling, consider the cost, dare to care, and break the cycle. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 408 in the red hymn book, The Gift of Love. Would you please stand?